The shooting in El Paso, Texas, that killed 22 people as of Thursday morning hit close to home for many New Mexicans because it was close to home. Added to shootings at schools in Roswell and Aztec and connections to other mass shootings, policymakers are pondering what can be done. So joining me today to find their valuable insight and opinions, we welcome former State Senator Eric Griego to the table. Also with us is Crystal Ciarza. She's CEO of Ciarza Social Digital. A professor in the UNM Poli-Sci Department, Lana Atkinson, is here. And Sophie Martin, one of our line regulars and a local attorney. Now, Eric, at least in the El Paso attack, there's a domestic terrorism aspect to this. And the shooter's actions, less known about the Dayton guy, but we do know that he had his own affiliations of things about Antifa and all these other things that he had been posting as well. So he had two different ideologies going on there. But what kind of threat is homegrown domestic terrorism as it sits now? Is it getting worse? Or is this something topped off in your mind that we're going to finally get some action here? Is this the one that finally, this weekend was the one that finally did it for us?
Sadly, every time we have one of these, we think this is going to be the tipping point, right? I mean, I think the new narrative, which I think the right and the president's folks are pushing back on, is that this is a kind of a sort of a white nationalist, white supremacy thing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of evidence around that, right? I mean, going back to Timothy McVeigh and some of the sort of militia movement, that this isn't just an angry young guy who is trying to make his mark or made a really incredibly bad decision. There is this sort of manifesto that's been tied to him that mirrors a lot of the language we hear coming from the president and from the right and from white nationalists. Mm-hmm. And I do want to just push back on the sort of the false equivalency. The kid who committed the mass shooting in Ohio clearly had left-leaning tendencies, but that wasn't his motivation from what I can tell and what I've read. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was on the left, but he wasn't trying to make a political statement. Right. He had some real troubling personal issues and so on. Mm-hmm. Whereas this seemed to be part of a larger narrative, mm-hmm. and despite the lone wolf kind of narrative that's out there, I think that there is increasingly sort of a movement around white nationalism, the pushback on immigrants, and I have to say it, we have to be honest, and I would say if God forbid I was a Republican and a Trump supporter, mm-hmm. that you have to call it, right? And people are starting to call it out, like you can't, the most powerful office, the biggest bully pulpit on earth, mm-hmm. you cannot be that careless with your words. And the constant attack on immigrants and on brown people, frankly, for people who aren't stable or who have another agenda, this is sort of a green light, right. Tacit or not, to do this, right? And so he's had to do all this backpedaling. The shooter used the words invasion. Yeah, exactly. You can't do it. And El Paso, because we share so much with them.
That's right.
And our community is very much like El Paso. Mm-hmm. I know people in this community are very, very scared. Like, am I safe because of the color of my skin or because of my nationality, right? And that's not American. I mean, that's just not.
That's right. I'm going to swing to you, Crystal, on this. The governor wants to have a summit. Our Speaker of the House, Brian Ingoff, wants to have a summit. What could possibly come out of that? Are there any gun laws that we're not doing or should be doing now that could come out of this thing?
I think obviously they're trying to find the solutions to make sure that they prevent a situation like this coming into New Mexico.
Right.
The genuine problem that I have with the fact that they're having a public safety summit, though, is that they're not actually inviting the public to be a part of it. So I was looking at the names that were on there, and they're missing people that are organizers of large events. You look at Las Vegas as one of the largest massacres across in the country. Mm-hmm. So they don't have organizers of large events at the table. They don't have the retail association at the table or larger retailers, case in point with Walmart. Mm-hmm. And they don't have psychologists or they have investigative teams to a certain degree, but they don't have investigative teams that specialize in digital research. So, because if you think about this last shooting, the gentleman had posted a lot of information on 8chan. Other mass shooters actually do their research on mass shootings or idolize shooters from YouTube or from what they see on the dark web or something of those sorts. Right. So I appreciate the fact that they're taking the initiative, and I do appreciate the fact that they're trying to make the resolution because, again, we're so tired of hearing this rhetoric of, how do we solve the problem of mass shootings? But at the same time, I don't think it's enough information to know that if they're going to implement or make public safety recommendations, you actually have to have the people that deal with these instances at the table. So I work a lot with large events like Somos, mud volleyball, wine
sure.
festivals,
Yep.
and they have their own type of private security. But the private security they're only trained so much with active shootings that if there's going to be, state mandates over the private security, you kind of have to let them know what they do and what they can provide with the limited budget that they have to run the event in the first place.
That's an interesting thought. That does have to be beefed up, doesn't it? I never
Absolutely.
really thought about that. It's interesting. Sophie, the idea that the president has done this and others, that mental illness is the driver here, is a big debate. My read is the science says mentally ill people tend to harm themselves more than do mass shootings, but it's out there.
And are the victims of violence
Thank
as well.
you.
And that's one of the things that I think has been a real struggle during this time, and not just now, but in recent years, is that there is a certain amount of as Eric was saying, it was like finger pointing and who we blame now, and not enough, I think, reliance on the research that we do have. And I'm just going to acknowledge we don't have enough research in part because of restrictions that were placed on our government and our researchers over the last decades. But what we know is that while it feels like this majority of shooters, all shooters must be mentally ill, because what sane person would behave in this way?
That's the usual line.
What we know is that's not really true. That sane people do commit terrible crimes, and that white nationalism, while it seems like a type of insanity to many of us, it does not meet that definition. And so I think, unfortunately, there has been a tendency to sort of grab at like what feels like an easy answer, but is not necessarily an answer at all.
Lana, the idea that as we sit here taping this on Thursday midday, there is some noise in Washington, D.C. that's a little crack of light that perhaps background checks might have a chance. The president has said he supports this idea. The NRA has said they don't support this idea, and they let the president know that. But are we at a political moment where perhaps this idea of background checks as just a reasonable first start has a possibility here? Are the politics, lining up here, the constellation possibly?
I think it's a possibility that something could happen. I mean, the president is facing a re-election year is coming up, and he's got to think about this issue, and so does the larger Republican Party. How are they going to face this? How are they going to face their constituents and the NRA? How are they going to balance those two? And the same with the Democrats. The Democrats ran away from this issue long ago because of the NRA's strength in running election campaigns.
Is there perceived weakness and opportunity? The NRA, is there perceived weakness right now and opportunity? They're having their troubles.
Absolutely.
Right now, so.
Absolutely. And I think gun owners and people who have NRA memberships are like, we have to do something.
Right.
Even people I know who love hunting and love the sport, they're like, something's got to happen.
That's right.
One of the things,
Real quick, if you
one
could.
of the things I think that's worth noting, though, with background checks is that there's a certain amount of, what has historically been termed garbage in, garbage out. If we're not thoughtful, thorough in terms of what would cause a flag in a background check, then check. I mean, so many of those shooters we've seen, like the family or the neighbors say, yeah, he was a weird kid, but that never makes it to law enforcement, or law enforcement doesn't collect
And in
that.
both El Paso and Dayton, there were warnings from family and
Yes.
friends.
Yes.
It was out there. We have to wrap that up there, unfortunately.